What is it like being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver full time? I'm gonna go pretty in depth on this video, and I'm gonna be very honest right in the beginning. I hated driving full time. There are some pros, there are some cons, but jumping right into it to give you kind of the full scope, and again, I'm gonna go more in depth. The biggest thing I'm gonna say is this: I've interviewed a lot of drivers while traveling. Remember, jumping right into this in case, like, say, you've never seen one of my videos, your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you make. And this is even more important for full-time income, right? If you're doing it part-time, well, you have other income coming in. However, if, like, say you live in a bad area to drive in, it's gonna be a nightmare trying to drive full-time, living off that income, trying to make ends meet, et cetera, et cetera. And when interviewing tons of drivers from around the country on this YouTube channel, reading all the comments, this is what I've noticed when it comes to full-time drivers. 75% of full-time drivers hate driving for Uber and Lyft. Or let's say they don't even drive anymore. I've gotten a lot of comments of someone saying, hey Mark, I used to drive full-time and it's changed, which I will talk about in a second. I'm not gonna lie, I don't drive at all anymore. I got a different job. I hate Lyft and Uber. I never wanna drive for them ever again. However, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, 25% of drivers, I'd say on average, say, oh my God, Mark, I love Lyft and Uber. I love driving full time. There's a bunch of benefits. So let's talk about this. Now, first off, one kind of big pro tip I am gonna say is this. You're always better, without question, starting off part-time and then moving to full-time. I have heard of people going right all in when it comes to full-time driving and everything. I don't think that's a good idea, because the last thing you want to do is start driving full-time and realize, oh, this is actually pretty bad. I'm not making that much money, and I'm spending all this time, et cetera, and now you're kind of locked in, so to speak. Granted, I guess you could always do it, let's say if you're between jobs or whatever, but I do want to say, don't just go straight into it with the mindset of driving full-time. For me personally, I started driving part-time, I loved it. Then I started driving full-time, I transitioned to full-time, and then I ended up hating it. Now let's talk about the pros and the cons. On one end, of course, there's a lot of pros to being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver. The biggest, of course, as we all know, is really being your own boss. It's the closest thing, as I like to say, it's the closest thing to being your own boss without being your own boss. And a lot of people who contact me who say that they love driving full-time mention this. They're like, hey Mark, if I want to take a week off and go to Miami or something, let's say Ultra Music Festival, for all my EDM people out there, is coming up. If I want to go to Ultra for a weekend or even a week and have fun in Miami, I don't have to take time off work. And yes, I think one benefit of this, of course, is part-time driving, is that let's say if you do a 9-to-5 job, you can drive on Friday and Saturday nights, you can kind of drive when you're not working, but as you can imagine, you still have to answer to a boss. When you drive full-time, because your main primary job is Uber and Lyft, well, hey, you could drive as much or as little as you want. So on one end, it is truly 100% flexible. And in my opinion, like I said, it's the closest in a way, it's the closest thing to being an entrepreneur without really having to go out and get like an LLC and, start your own business and do all this kind of stuff. You just immediately start driving. Two other benefits I will talk about pretty briefly. I didn't mention these on my video of what it's like to drive part-time. But the second thing I want to mention as a good benefit is the low barrier to entry. You could start driving and you don't need a college degree. You don't need to spend 4 years in a university spending all this money and racking up debt. You could start driving, and depending on where you are, making about 25 to 30 an hour is pretty ridiculous. I've mentioned this before. I'm a former accountant. To get that accounting degree was brutal. Years of schooling, hours. I mean, my average amount that I'd study for an accounting exam would be 30 to 40 hours for each individual exam. Obviously, a lot of debt when it comes to going to university. I then graduated with a bachelor's degree in accounting, and a lot of accounting jobs, as you can imagine, require that degree. However, some of those jobs, I'm not exaggerating, that require a bachelor's degree in accounting say, oh, starting position, 25 an hour. And I'm like, okay, so I can either do all this stuff to be an accountant, it's kind of a weird hand move, but all this stuff to be an accountant to make 25 an hour, or I just need a driver's license, which most people have anyway, and I can start driving for Lyft and Uber, and you don't even need a car. I know that's a big kind of barrier to entry for a lot of jobs, like you need a car to make money, but you need to make money to get that car. With Lyft and Uber, you don't have to worry about that. Second benefit, Third thing I want to talk about is the instant cash outs. Again, this exists for both part-time and full-time drivers. If you make 10, 20, 50, 100, 200, $300, whatever it is, you can hit a button and instantly have that money in your bank account. Now that is all amazing to me. And one thing I want to kind of loop back to is the whole aspect of renting a car. Now this is a big thing that talked about driving part-time. If you're driving part-time, I think renting a car is not worth it. Maybe look at another job, because if you think about it, you start in the hole, and on average it costs $200 to $300 a week to rent a car. So if you're spending on average $250 a week and you're only driving part-time, it might take you a lot of hours to then pay that off and just to break even. Of course, anything on top of that is now profit, but you still have to make at least $250 a week. If you drive full-time, that's a lot more feasible. So again, that's another pro I will say when it comes to full-time driving. Here's where you're gonna see the big pros and the big cons as I start now moving into the negative aspects of full-time driving is the pay. Not surprising to anybody, no surprise here. The pay of Lyft and Uber drivers is way worse than it ever used to be, and might even get worse, to be honest. I mean, when I first started driving, which was in 2014/2015, I never heard of anyone complaining about the pay. I made great pay. It would depend on what's going on, but I'd say on average, anywhere between 20 to 25 an hour. When I was in Boston, when it would snow, it would be anywhere between, I'd say maybe 25 to 30 an hour, upwards of 60 an hour. Again, a huge spread depending on how much it would snow, if the T would break down, all these different factors. But I made really, really good money as an Uber and Lyft driver. Never heard of anyone complaining. Now, however, Uber and Lyft drivers make way less money than ever before. And if you think about it, if you're driving part-time and you're making some money here and there, not as much of a big deal. To you, whatever you make, it's going towards a vacation, towards your savings, whatever. But when you have to rely on that money, when you have to 100% rely on that money, and not only that, but that money has to pay your bills. That money has to put food on the table. That money is what you need to pay off this, and this. Loud motorcycle. Sorry about that. But anyway, that money has to pay off all these different bills. That becomes a lot more cutthroat. And this leads me into another negative aspect, kind of going along with the pay, is when I was driving full time, and this is kind of an interesting point I've never talked about on any video, is that I felt more like a salesman than I did a rideshare driver. And what I mean is the only way I make money is if I go out and drive. In a sense, I am selling my services as a driver, as a chauffeur, to drive people around and everything, and obviously I get a cut from what Lyft and Uber makes and blah, blah, blah. Very similar to, like, say, if you're in a car dealership and you sell cars. If you don't sell any cars, you don't make any money. It's very feast or famine if, like, say, you work or don't work when you're a salesman. You don't have a steady paycheck. You don't have a steady 9-to-5 job where every 2 weeks you get a check and whatever, or direct deposit. Not the case with Lyft and Uber. And so a big negative aspect is I felt like more of a salesman where I had to go out and make sure I had to drive. In a sense, I guess in a weird way, depending on how you look at it, you kind of are. Now, yes, Lyft and Uber, of course, applies the ride to you hit a button and you go out and drive. But I almost kind of felt more of that financial, I don't say fear, but I think you know what I mean when I say that, where it's like, okay, if I don't go out and drive, Lyft and Uber's not going to contact me. I'm not going to get penalized or anything. If I don't drive, I won't make money and I won't be able to pay bills. So that is another thing I will say. If you're not self-motivated enough, that is a big other negative aspect about full-time driving. But again, this all kind of loops back to the pay. If you live in a really good area to drive, like I mentioned before, that 25 versus 75% of drivers, for those 25% of drivers who love driving for Uber and Lyft, they live in a really good area to drive. I just talked about the top 5 places when it comes to driving for Lyft and Uber, which are San Diego, the Bay Area, Boston, Denver, and I'm missing the last one. Shoot. I'll post that video in the description below. There's one that I'm missing. It'll probably come to me in, Los Angeles. How did I forget LA? That's where I live now. So those are the main 5, or the top 5 that can make the most amount of money. But New York, another great one. I've heard of Miami drivers making good money. Orlando, Florida. I just got this comment of someone saying, hey, I make really good money in Orlando, Florida. So there are different places you can make a lot of money. I interviewed a driver last year, actually, in Austin, Texas, who made above 6 figures driving. I talked to a driver in Nashville who said, oh yeah, on a Friday and Saturday, on average, I make between $600 and $800 on a Friday and Saturday. That is ridiculous money. So if you live in a good area and you're driving full time and you can make that kind of money, well, of course, why would you not want to, right? You can make a lot of money, you have your own schedule, and if you can make $600 to $800 a day, let's say driving in Nashville, for example, you could drive 2 days a week, right? Make anywhere between $1,200 and $1,800 a week. You just drive 2 days a week, you have the rest of the week off to do whatever. No big deal, that's pretty awesome. But on the other end, if you're like say driving, and I've seen some reports, like say by Ridester and other companies saying, oh yeah, in some bad areas, you might make $12 an hour. Well, if you're driving full time and you're driving a ton and every single hour you're only making on average 12, you have to work so much. And this does not even involve accounting, which is something I'm gonna talk about in a second. You have to drive an insane amount to not make that much money. And this is why a lot of drivers are like, oh, I'm driving full time. I thought it'd be great having my own flexible schedule, but I'm not making that much money. And I feel kind of like a slave where Uber and Lyft is taking complete advantage of me. And depending on the area, they kind of are, right? And this is why it's very interesting on this channel, especially from my perspective, seeing all the videos, of course, that I post, seeing all the comments, that there's comment wars. And some drivers are like, I hate Lyft and Uber. Some drivers are like, I love Lyft and Uber. They're both right. And the big meta-analysis, looking at both of them, is their location. And now, talking again, not just the location, but the pay, is the whole other side of the coin, and that is accounting. Remember one, let's talk about the insurance. I do suggest you get rideshare insurance, so you're gonna have to spend an extra, I find $6 to $20 extra a month. You should still do this if you're driving part-time, but remember, the more that you're on the road, the more likely you are to get into an accident. This is why, from part-time to full-time, your risk increases a lot. Get rideshare insurance. Another thing, spend money, get a dash cam. You never know what's gonna happen. In addition, make sure you get a dash cam that films both outside and inside of your car. Some dash cams can do both at the same time, filming like this, so to speak. Other people I've seen have 2 different dash cams. One films outside, one films inside. Either way, just have that just in case. Again, statistics. The more that you're on the road, it's just pure accounting. The more that you're on the road, the more people in your car, the more likely something is to happen. And if it does, this is not a situation you want to be in. I did a video about deactivation, for example, that lets you have a dispute with a passenger. Even if you did nothing wrong, Uber or Lyft can either A, just terminate your account without warning, or B, they can put you on freeze, which means they say, okay, you can't drive for 2 weeks. We're just going to review the situation, talk to them, talk to you, try to figure it out, and then maybe reinstate your account. And well, yeah, let's say if they realize that you weren't wrong and you did nothing wrong, and let's say they're like, hey, sorry, we froze your account for only a week. Sorry about that. You can now go out and drive. Well, if you think about it, if you're driving full time and you're relying on the income, you're not driving part time or just kind of side cash. If you're driving full time and they say you can't drive for a week, that's pretty much like being fired instantly without any warning. Now you have no pay for a week. And then, yeah, they bring you back and they say, oh, sorry about that. We're sorry. But now you're kind of worried because now you're like, oh, shoot, could this happen again? I did nothing wrong and blah, blah, blah. This is why I suggest have dash cam footage. And in addition, as a side note, if actually you do ever have a dispute with a passenger, make sure, without question, do what I like to call first contact. If you have any issue, immediately, as quick as you can, contact Uber and Lyft and say, hey, I just want to let you know, I just dropped off a passenger. Here's what happened. It was a minor dispute. I just want to let you know. You're way better off being on the offensive side of saying this just happened. I'm just giving you a heads up. Than being on the defensive side. We're like, wait, that's not what happened. Like I don't know why they told you that. Like, this is what happened. And now you have to defend yourself. Now your account might get frozen. You might get deactivated. And unfortunately, Uber and Lyft will typically favor passengers more than drivers. It's kind of like you're guilty before being proven innocent, so to speak, rather than the other way around. Again, all these things you need to be aware of. And then going now deeper into the accounting, of course, is taxes. The 2 things that are guaranteed in life, death and taxes. And yes, the taxes when it comes to Uber and Lyft, especially if you've never done that before as an independent contractor, get very intricate. This is why I suggest, I've done full videos about this, get a tax accountant, 1, and 2, track all of your receipts. So any single time you buy something in relation to Uber and Lyft, the dash cam that I mentioned, rideshare insurance, if let's say you buy an aux cord so people can play music, if you buy a long phone charger so people can charge their phones in your car, all these things that go to the ordinary and necessary course of being an Uber and Lyft driver, you can write those off. Of course, again, make sure you hire a tax accountant. And then lastly, and the big kicker among all of this, is the fact that you have to pretty much pay pay or you owe money in taxes rather than getting money back. My best advice is save about 30% of what you make. Of course, there's a lot of factors to this. This is why I suggest, I'm a former accountant, but I'm not your accountant. Save 30%. So let's say you go out and on a really good Friday night, again, you're driving full time, keep in mind, which means any money that you make is not taxed immediately, so to speak, if that makes sense. Again, I'm wording this very simply. Let's say you make $300, just take about 100 of that, put it in your savings account, you don't touch it. Now, do I think you're gonna have to give 30% of all your earnings to the IRS? No. With the write-offs and everything, if you ever go to a tax accountant, I do not suggest using TurboTax, by the way. I hate TurboTax. I suggest talking to a real-life human, so to speak, and having them help you out. Like, I pay my tax accountant $250 every year to do everything for me. Well worth the money, and I spend less of my taxes, light years more than $250, than the $250 I spend him, or excuse me, than the $250 I give him, if that makes sense. So even though, yes, you're giving up $250, again, for a tax accountant, just for example, you're going to be able to spend and have to pay less money on your taxes overall, which means that you have more money in your pocket. However, with that being said, just remember, if you're driving full time, you have to be a lot more aware of your accounting. And let's say, again, you're doing part-time, you do have to be aware of it, but not as much, right? You're only making, I don't know, let's say, for a part-time driver, it's really tough to say how much you can make. But let's say you drive 10 hours a week, you make $20 an hour, looking at $200 a week, times 4 is 800. So let's say in the given year, you're making, let's say, 8K. Yeah, you might have to owe a little bit on that 8K, but depending on how much money you're paying in other taxes or how much money that you've withheld, you might be able to break even in some sense. But with part-time, it's not much of an issue. Again, I'm wording this simply compared to driving full-time. These are all different things you have to worry about. And that's why overall, when it comes to driving full-time, I'm going pretty in-depth on this video because I just want drivers to be aware of what they're getting into. I'm not saying Uber and Lyft is bad. I think all the pros, which is interesting, as long as you live in a good area, all the pros are like amplified, right? You're even more so your own boss. You're even more flexible. You could go on a 2-week vacation and not tell anybody, right? You can cash out everything you earn. As opposed to a 9-to-5 job, you still have to wait 2 weeks, right? So all the pros are amplified, especially the lower barrier to entry. I mean, like I said, I met a driver in Austin who makes 6 figures, and he didn't need a college degree. He didn't need a 4-year university kind of thing where he's paying debt, whatnot. Nope. He's now just making 6 figures, driving specifically, I will say, for Uber. So all the pros are amplified when it comes to driving full time. Likewise, though, all the cons are amplified driving full time. There's more likely that something is going to happen, whether it's an accident, a situation with someone in your car, et cetera, et cetera. If, let's say, you live in a good area to drive, like I said, that's a great pro, it's more amplified. If you live in a bad area to drive, on the flip side, it's more amplified. You can make even less money, and that's gonna be your full-time income, can be pretty tricky. And then, of course, with all that, the accounting, the taxes, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of things to weigh out. And that's why I would suggest, at the end of the day, and at the end of all this, all these tricky things, all the kind of pros and cons aspect of being a rideshare driver, always drive part-time, feel it out, test the waters, and then determine, do I want to stay driving part-time or move to full-time?